Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. If you have time, and you talk about the Virginia Tech opening, I think they've got to make Shane Beamer and Jimbo Fisher say no. Beamer might leave if South Carolina turns on him after a disappointing year. Okay, so this is a great question. We'll leave this up for half a second. And let me start by saying this. So I'm going to take it down because it's distracting me. But that's the question. That's what you need to know. And, it's funny because on Sunday, if you listen to the show Sunday, we appreciate everybody tuning in on Sunday mornings. On the show Sunday, I did reference like, hey, when we were talking Nico, I was like, I think there's a chance Deshaun Foster could be let go by the time that you listen to this clip. Well, fast forward, Deshaun Foster was let go on Sunday. We did an instant reaction to it. I encourage you to check it out. But then as Deshaun Foster was getting fired, it came out that Brent Pry was fired as well at Virginia Tech. Not really surprising, certainly given the circumstances of, several disappointing years. You're 0-3. You get destroyed by Vanderbilt at home. Not to mention that, oh, by the way, just a couple hours later, or a week later, you lose to Old Dominion at home. And I understand that this is a different program in a different world in college sports. But as the old saying goes, no excuses, play like a champion. So first of all, the job itself. And I've seen, I love this audience because you guys are so smart, so knowledgeable. And I've seen a lot of people talking about this in the chat. And I think you guys are 1,000% right, is that the dynamics at Virginia Tech have changed, right? We all, most of us remember the Michael Vick days. I'm sure not everybody does. But the dynamics have changed. And why the dynamics have changed is that basically, the recruiting dynamics have changed. And the reality is that, listen, when Virginia Tech kind of was on the come up, listen, we don't have to get into boring geography here, but the Tidewater area in Virginia was kind of this under-recruited spot. And it was there was a lot of great talent there. Not a lot of people were going in there. And Virginia Tech was like, if nobody else is going to go in there, we're going to go in there. And that's obviously where they got Mike Vick, later on Marcus Vick, and a lot of the best guys that made them who they are. Well, I think what has changed with Virginia Tech is a couple things. One, there's just raw finances. We just talked about it with Arkansas. We've talked about it with Texas. And I think Virginia Tech, I know because there's public records that indicate this, Virginia Tech is just so far behind the 8 ball. They're so far behind Clemson. And I know Miami's a private school, so we don't know. But we know Miami's spending way more money than Virginia Tech, Florida State, et cetera, et cetera. So one, there's the finances. But two, the recruiting has changed so much. And it's so interesting to me. And it's maybe the biggest change in college football that, like, we always talk about the portal. We talk about NIL. We didn't talk more about how much recruiting has changed in this world in college football. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that even 10, 12, 15 years ago, recruiting was largely geographic, right? It was most of the best players in SoCal went to USC. Most of the best players in Texas went to Texas, A&M, whatever. Most of the best players in Florida went to Florida, Florida State, Miami. Now it's just kind of, you just go wherever. And sometimes it's NIL related. Sometimes you want to play in the SEC. Sometimes you want to play at Michigan, whatever. But I think that's the biggest change is, it's funny. I was texting a buddy of mine. Number one recruit in the state of California is committed to Texas A&M. Like, that tells you everything you need to know. Alabama last year, they had more blue chip recruits from the state of California in the 2025 class than they did in the state of Alabama. If you remember last year, Hugh Freeze crushed in the state of Alabama. We'll talk about Hugh Freeze later on in the week because they got a big game, but some of those guys are already playing really well. And so recruiting has changed. I saw this in the chat, so I want to give credit where it's due to whoever said it. But let's see if I can find it really quick. Let me see. Give me half a second. We were talking about Virginia Tech. Give me 1 sec. I know this is bad video, bad audio. Frank brings up the really good point. He says, now that the Big Ten pays players, they took over the DMV and Virginia recruiting areas. And I think there's something to that. As he said, Michigan, Maryland, and Penn State are all recruiting at a higher level than Virginia and Virginia Tech. And it's because Penn State is now not just recruiting Pennsylvania. They're going wherever. And I think that's the biggest X factor, is now Michigan's recruiting Virginia. Penn State is, Ohio State is. Travion Henderson's from Virginia. He went to Ohio State. The Savion Hyder kid, I think is how you pronounce his name, is from Virginia. He's going to Michigan next year. And so I just bring it up because Virginia Tech and Virginia don't have that recruiting advantage anymore. Now, to Luke's question and Luke's point, because Luke asked specifically about Shane Beamer, I'll say this. I think if I had to bet today on if Shane Beamer, I'm going to probably trip that up a few times. If Shane Beamer was the next head coach, I don't think it's going to happen, but I do think this is that I do think, to the point that Luke brought up, I do think that there is a realm of possibility where by the end of the year, South Carolina fans are kind of out on Shane Beamer. And I understand he's coming off a 9-win year. And I understand that he, has obviously had a great deal of success. But at the same time, one, this is a fickle year-to-year sport, year-to-year league in the SEC, and South Carolina inherently is at a disadvantage in that league. And so you go back and listen, I'm going to get sidetracked here, and this is a Virginia Tech segment, not a South Carolina segment. So I never understood why a school like South Carolina, Arkansas, Kentucky, Virginia, or Vanderbilt, ever wanted Texas and Oklahoma in the SEC. Who cares how much money you're making if you can't win, or if it makes it that much harder to win? And so last year with South Carolina, I think it was just lightning in a bottle, right? You go back to last year, you go back to the fact that they started off slow, but they were playing well. To their credit, easily could have beaten LSU, easily could have beaten Bama. But at the same time, they kind of hit lightning in a bottle, a bunch of NFL dudes on defense, the quarterback pops at the right moment, and all of a sudden you have a 9-win season. Now, the counter to that is South Carolina is not a place where year over year over year over year, you just got 10 dudes on the NFL on the practice squad that are going to, or on the second team scout team that are going to be playing in the NFL. That's just not the reality at a place like South Carolina. And I do think if Shane Beamer goes like 7-5, 6-6, I think he's got to consider it. I know he wants it to be right at South Carolina. I know he wants, to create his own legacy. I also know it's a lot easier to win at Virginia Tech than it is to win at South Carolina in the current state of the SEC. And so if you're Shane Beamer, you're still young, you're an alum, you come home, I think it makes perfect sense. So to me, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. I do think there is a conversation to be had. Now, Shane Beamer was asked about it at his Monday press availability, and he's like, I'm focused on Missouri this week, man. I got enough problems. I love that school, but I'm focused on Missouri. Go 6-6 and see what happens. Now, I think, Virginia Tech would say, well, do you want to coach off a 6-6 year? I do think if it is the right coach, given the circumstances, given that he's an alum, given that his dad is a legend there, I think they would still take him even off a disappointing year. As far as other coaching candidates are concerned, I'll say this, I'm no disrespect intended. I don't think Michael Vick is a candidate. For people who don't know, Michael Vick is actually coaching college football this year at Norfolk State. It was kind of funny. I was flipping channels on Saturday watching games. Big Ten Network had Rutgers, Norfolk State, and they're interviewing Michael Vick on the sideline. I was like, oh my goodness, I forgot Michael Vick was the head coach here. I don't think he's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen right now. I just don't think he's the guy. Some other guys kind of in that geographic footprint, I'll say this. Listen, I think a best case scenario is maybe an Alex Golish. You just never know what jobs are going to open up, and you never know who's going to be interested in who, right? Guys that make sense for some jobs might not make sense at others. And so could Alex Golish be in the mix? I think he would be a very good candidate and very good fit there. He obviously has coached kind of in that pseudo area of the country, coming from Tennessee to USF. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I think outside of Alex Golish, I think it'll be interesting because does a Jamie Chadwell, the guy, I'll say a couple names. One, Kentucky fans, cover your ears. I think John Summerall's getting a big-time job somewhere. I think Tulane is going to be good again this year. I think he's kind of actually figured out the group of five thing. Like, he loses Darian Mensah, and guess what ends up happening? He goes and gets Jake Retzlaff. They beat Duke this past weekend. They're 3-0 going into a game against Ole Miss. He is going to get another head coaching opportunity. I do think if you are a Kentucky fan, for people who don't know, John Summerall is a Kentucky alum and has previously coached there. And I think every Kentucky fan is praying that he's the next head coach. You better hope that Virginia Tech doesn't go after him because I think he is going to be really good wherever he lands. John Summerall would be a name that I would go after. The other guy that I really like, and this is kind of a random name, but Bob Chesney is the head coach at James Madison. And I think what's interesting about Bob Chesney, the reason I know this guy's name, he was at Holy Cross before he was at James Madison. And I bring it up because Holy Cross, in the final year before Jim Mora got to UConn, they were an FCS. They are an FCS program. First of all, tiny school in Massachusetts, probably have like an enrollment of 3,000. They went to UConn. Now, admittedly, UConn an independent, but they're still an FBS program, 85 scholarships. They destroyed UConn in the final year before Jim Mora got there. Now, Randy Edsall, I think at that point had been fired. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I was like, this Chesney guy is a heck of a coach. Well, he goes to James Madison. Remember, last year was the first year in the post-Signetti era. Kurt Signetti took a lot of players with him. Bob Chesney goes 9-4. I think that dude is a future superstar in the coaching ranks. And so I just bring it up because to me, this is a guy that absolutely stands out. This is a guy that, in my opinion, is going to be a star. But I think, if it's not Shane Beamer, it's going to be one of that tier of guys. It's going to be a Bob Chesney. It's going to be Alex Golish. It's going to be maybe a John Summerall. I actually like the candidate pool. But again, I think the candidate pool largely depends on what other jobs become available elsewhere. We think Florida is going to open up. I think the SEC, what happens at Arkansas with Sam Pittman, what happens at Kentucky with Mark Stoops. I know Mark Stoops' buyout is like $40 million, but as I always say, if Mark Stoops goes 3-9 again this year, I don't think he's coming back.